Before we jump into the episode, I want to thank our sponsor, Evidently. Evidently is the clinical data intelligence platform built to help physicians harness the ocean of patient data they're drowning in every day. From chart summarization to AI-assisted note drafting and denial appeal support, Evidently makes sure the right data shows up at the right time. Physicians using Evidently report spending less time hunting through charts and more time focusing on patient care. That's why they've become a trusted partner to health systems looking to improve documentation, quality, and revenue sustainability. The company is led by providers and AI researchers that are dedicated to reducing documentation burden and helping clinicians practice at the top of their license. If you want to see what Evidently can do for your hospital or your practice, reach out today at www.evidently.com. Now, let's get into today's episode. Before we jump into the episode, I want to thank our newest How I Doctor sponsor, Savaro. Savaro is a top telestroke and neurology company that was built to fix one of the most predictable failures in modern medicine, getting timely, consistent access to a neurologist when you actually need one. Their team of board-certified neurologists deliver rapid video response, clear decision-making support, and continuity from the first exam all the way through treatment planning and management. Hospitals working with Savaro see faster door-to-needle times, fewer transfers, and measurable improvements in patient outcomes. And because Savaro was built by physicians, the workflows actually match real-world medicine. If you need stronger, faster, and more predictable neurology coverage, visit Savaro.com to learn more. And now, let's get into today's episode.
Welcome to How I Doctor, where we're bringing joy back to medicine. A few notes before we get into today's episode. First, I know many of you are off this week with a much-deserved spring break. We wanted to make sure you had something worth putting in your ears, so we went back into the archive and pulled out some of our best of AI conversations. Second, AI has been impossible to escape lately. A few weeks ago, we hosted our first AI residency for clinician session, and the response was frankly a little overwhelming. Hundreds of physicians showed up, the questions were sharp, the conversation was real, and it confirmed what we've been hearing from all of you. You're not afraid of AI, you're just trying to figure out where it actually fits. We're already planning the next webinar for May. And third, you may notice my voice sounds a little bit different. I've got an ongoing laryngitis, probably from human metapneumovirus. Happy, joy. So I took the chance for a little AI test of my own. I recreated my own voice with AI. For the interludes between the clips, the parts that aren't actually interviews, you're going to be hearing an AI clone of my voice.
Neogram sounds like this, and he was trained on an open source model that you can run on your home computer using only 8 seconds of my voice audio from this very podcast. We figured if we were going to do a best of AI episode, we might as well put some skin in the game. The future is weird, a little scary and strange, isn't it? We're starting today with two of the most prominent figures in academic and applied artificial intelligence, a conversation about what comes after large language models. Yann LeCun holds the Turing Award and spent years as Meta's chief AI scientist. Alex LeBrun is a serial entrepreneur who co-founded NABLA, one of the leading AI scribe companies in healthcare, and is now building something new with Yann. The company is called AMI, Advanced Machine Intelligence, focusing on what they call world models. What that might mean for a physician trying to think through a complex patient, here's Yann and Alex.
What is a world model, and how is it maybe different from what people are now used to as AI, like a large language model?
So think about how you act in the world. When you're facing a new situation, you want to do a task that you're not completely familiar with. You use your mind to essentially imagine what the result or the consequences of your actions are going to be. You can figure out a sequence of actions to arrive at a particular goal. Whether you're building something or just any task that you're accomplishing, really. That's the idea of world model. The world model is a model or a computer program or something like that, given some idea of the state of the world at time t and an action that you imagine taking will predict the state of the world at time t+1, resulting from this action. So that's very different from what kind of the current crop of agentic systems, if you want, will do. The current way agentic systems are trained, they're like LLMs. They just, predict one token after the other, tokens being actions, right? They have to produce an action blindly and then just kind of you cross your finger that this action is correct. And so the only way to make those things work is to collect lots and lots and lots of data for a particular task and then have them just imitate whatever, action sequences humans do in those situations. And that's brittle. It only works in certain cases. And it requires collecting a lot of data for, training
the entire internet and everything that's ever been published in the world. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. It's really amazing how far you can get with just like extremely complex math that is predicting the next word and the next token. But it certainly is not everything. You run into the limitations. And I think those of us who are like playing around with large language models and trying to understand how they might fit into healthcare, we see where they start to break down. And it does seem to be that planning phase like you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really impressive how those things work, right?
Yeah, totally.
And it was, a little bit of a surprise when it first emerged, but they're very useful, and there's a lot of people working on them, and a lot of people who should be working on them. A lot of money being spent,
lots of money,
in the infrastructure, to run them. That's fine, but they have some limitations, and you have to really be conscious of them, and they're particularly acute in healthcare or any kind of situation where reliability is really paramount.
Yeah. Alex, you're a computer scientist as well. What do you think the implications are of world models? Why are you guys so convinced that this will be kind of the next big thing in artificial intelligence and automation technology?
I think, as Yann described, LLMs are designed to process tokenized data. So anything with token, so discrete data with low dimension. And we know this is not how the world is working. And, babies, you often use this example, Yann, but babies as young as 8-9 months old already have a very good model of the world. So if you launch a ball in the air, sorry, I'm stealing all your, but you launch a ball and then the ball somehow gets stuck in the air. Before 5 or 6 months old, babies are not surprised.
It is amazing that like the human brain, just with observation over time, starts to build these neuron patterns and understand these things.
It builds a model of the world and then uses this model to make predictions and planning. Also, we know that LLMs are like a shortcut focused on language that is very useful in many use cases. But it's just one side of how our brain works. It's just one part, small part of the brain, and we feel that to unlock new, further use cases with AI, we need to be looking for something else, something different from LLMs.
That was the view from the frontier of AI research. Now let's bring it closer to the clinic. Dr. Bob Wachter chairs the Department of Medicine at UCSF, literally coined the term hospitalist, and wrote The Digital Doctor a decade ago. His new book, A Giant Leap, makes a case for what he calls informed optimism about AI and healthcare. In this conversation, Bob and I dig into 3 of the questions I hear the most. Will AI actually make doctors better? Are we de-skilling a generation of trainees? And is there a part of medicine we should never let AI touch? Here's Bob Wachter.
I was in between night shifts when ChatGPT came out, and I made an account probably at 6 p.m. before I had to go into my 9 p.m. shift. And the first hour of my shift, I'm just showing people on my laptop, hey, you guys, look at this new thing.
Look at this.
I mean, immediately, I think you and I are similar. Immediately, I was like, oh, damn. Oh, okay. I'm immediately starting to, the fireworks are already in my head of how this is going to impact my care delivery and my patients. And, I got so excited that first night, and it's kind of never stopped.
Yeah. And over the course of, a year and a half of doing the research and writing it, the other thing that gave me hope is I'm already using it, as I'm sure you are, in ways that maybe aren't quite transformative yet, but are meaningful. And that there's no prior technology in healthcare like that sort of infiltrated its way into my daily work. I was just on the wards the last 10 days. I used open evidence 15 times a day. These tools now are out there, and we're seeing what they look like in real life in ways that I've never seen a technology that's done that in healthcare.
And I do think that we will get to a point with AI where physicians and patients will trust some AI system, whether it is, an open evidence model, a ChatGPT model, something that doesn't even exist today. I think we will get to that point where we're just like inherently, oh yeah, this thing's right.
I already do kind of. I am comforted when I sort of make a diagnosis, and then I put it into Open Evidence or Gemini or whatever, and it comes up with the same diagnosis, I feel better. It was like, okay, it looked over my shoulder, just the opposite of the human in the loop. It's the AI in the loop. It's, it's like my answer comports with its answer. I feel better.
One of the things you touch on, which I'm so appreciative in the book, is de-skilling. And I wonder, as somebody that uses generative AI many times a day, do you think it is or will make you de-skilled? Will you lose some of those skills for looking up information, or will you become too reliant on these models and less able yourself to trust your own judgment, do you think?
I think the real answer is we don't know. I think that's a real tension in this, and not just in medicine. I mean, when I do, the best job I can do writing a paragraph or two, and then I say, Claude, which is a great editor, can you make this a little better? Is that making me better or worse, or both? Probably a little bit of both. I mean, some de-skilling is fine. I mean, I no longer know how to read a map, and that's fine. I don't have to read a map. We are de-skilling on the physical exam. Is that bad? A little bit, but I think we often romanticize the physical exam, and I would trust your bedside ultrasound over the physical exam in many cases. So some of it's fine. One of the big fundamental questions I grapple with in the book is for the foreseeable future, we're going to have AI, whether it's in decision support or scribing or whatever it's in, that is good enough to be useful but not perfect. And therefore, the system will be the human in the loop, will be the AI does something, the human looks over its shoulder and then opines. And to the extent that we de-skill, you can see us entering a death spiral where the AI is actually better. You don't want the human weighing in because the human will screw things up. I think it's the fundamental question in medical education. And I have a chapter on my visit at NYU where we just grappled a lot with, do we continue to teach the fundamentals? I think the answer is, for now, absolutely, because for now, not only looking over the AI's shoulder and saying that's a good answer and that answer is wrong, but also knowing what to put into the AI and knowing when I need the AI and when I don't. And nobody's got time to put every single issue you grapple with. Think about your next ER shift. And for every patient, you're going to have to go to GPT or Open Evidence and put in a prompt and wait for the answer. The waiting room would be 9 miles long. So it can't work. But I can see a day where, yes, we will de-skill, and it's okay because it's a skill we're no longer using.
Should there be something in medicine that we never let AI touch?
Never's a hard word.
Yeah.
Discussing with a patient that they have a fatal disease or have cancer or have some dread disease, I can't see it anytime soon. I don't want it anytime soon.
Bob, finish this sentence. If a physician only remembers one idea from your book, what should it be?
Eric Topol wrote a blurb, and he said makes an eloquent case for informed optimism. I think the tonal piece of it is as important as any kind of factoid or use case or whatever. I think being optimistic that this is actually going to make medicine better, safer, more satisfying for everybody, patients and clinicians. And I think ultimately less expensive, although we're pretty good at preventing that from happening. So I think having that attitude then opens you up to, it hallucinates. Well, yeah, it did a lot 3 years ago. It does a hell of a lot less now. Just being open to being thoughtful about trying it in places where I think it can make a difference.
A quick word about today's sponsor, Evidently. Their platform turns an ocean of fragmented clinical data into concise, actionable insights. Chart summaries, note drafting, denial appeal support, HCC capture, so you spend time caring, not chasing. A transplant surgeon at a large academic medical center recently took transplant referral review from 2 hours to 20 minutes with AI-assisted chart review from Evidently. Physicians deserve workflows that improve accuracy, reduce exhausting chart biopsy, and help us practice at the top of our license. If you want to see how this might work in your hospital or your department, go to evidently.com. That's evidently.com to get started today. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Savaro. If you've ever waited and waited for a neurologist to call you back, you know the problem that Savaro was built to fix. Savaro is a physician-led telestroke and neurology company that delivers rapid virtual neurology coverage that's reliable. Their board-certified neurologists connect by video in under 45 seconds, and they stay with you through the entire decision-making journey. Hospitals working with Savaro report faster door-to-needle times, fewer unnecessary transfers, and measurable improvements in patient outcomes. If your hospital needs stronger, faster, more consistent neurology coverage, visit Savaro.com to learn more. Before our final interview, we want to share a short physician spotlight from Dr. Stephanie Simmons. Dr. Simmons serves as Chief Medical Officer at the Dr. Lorna Breen Heroes Foundation, which works to remove barriers to mental health care for healthcare workers. This includes the stigmatizing language that still appears on state licensing board applications and credentialing forms. Here she reflects on something that doesn't get said out loud enough in medicine, the gap between the responsibility physicians carry and the control we actually have. Here's Dr. Stephanie Simmons.
One of the hardest things about being a physician that I think should be talked about more openly is the balance of control and responsibility. As a physician, you have a tremendous amount of responsibility and actually very little control. I like to think about this as the spheres of influence. So you have this little sphere in the middle, which you control, that mostly represents your thoughts and actions. And then expanding out, a larger sphere around that is what you can influence. The performance of your team, the atmosphere of your department, hospital operations, maybe even national policy. The largest sphere is things that are outside of your control that you need to accept. And for physicians, we are responsible for the things we control, must influence, and sometimes we're held accountable for things outside of our control, such as through malpractice litigation with an unavoidable death. Most people, physicians included, overestimate what they can control and underestimate what they can influence. We struggle to accept that some things like patient deaths are unavoidable. And it's really important to internalize these spheres of control, influence, and acceptance, because outside influences don't understand our work and where we can and should make an impact. So we need to be clear for ourselves. I love that the pit is showing the interpersonal sequelae of chronic and acute stress. It's really easy to engage with the competency, both the medical skill and the leadership in the first season. But now in the second season, we're seeing some of the real mental health and relationship fallout from that stress. And I was watching this season with my family, and my husband said, ER people should work in tours. It was a really interesting idea, and it highlighted the need for real rest and recovery from chronic stress. At the Dr. Lorna Breen Heroes Foundation, where I serve as Chief Medical Officer, we are working with state licensing boards and organizational credentialing committees to remove stigmatizing and invasive language around mental health care from their applications. Healthcare workers, including physicians, report that loss of privacy and job concerns are major reasons they hesitate to seek care. But this landscape is rapidly changing. For instance, there are now 43 state medical boards that don't have questions about mental health care, and over 2,000 organizations that have removed these questions from their credentialing applications and peer reference forms. We're working towards a world where seeking mental health care is universally viewed as a sign of strength. So if you want to check if your organization or state has made the changes, you can visit drlornabreen.org/remove barriers. So drlornabreen.org/remove barriers.
We're closing today with the view from inside the machine. Dr. David Roux is an infectious disease physician who became Global Chief Medical Officer at Microsoft. He sits at an unusual intersection. He has relationships with the CEOs of major health systems and the engineering leads at the biggest tech companies in the world, and his job is essentially to translate between them. David thinks about AI not as one thing, but as a portfolio of different tools stitched together. It's a grounding note to end on because as exciting as the research frontier is, what actually changes medicine is what gets deployed, what sticks, and what physicians trust. Here's David Roux.
Talking about AI and physicians, do you get the sense that we are really building technology that excites clinicians?
The technology continues to get better and better. So as most of the people that have experienced AI have found great value, a lot of it has been around, I'd say, more administrative type of tasks, making it easier for us to document, finding information, communicating with individuals. So to me, that's a fantastic start to how we can use AI, but that is not where it ends. In fact, there are so many amazing things we can do with AI that we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of. Things like access to affordable healthcare, rising cost of healthcare, finding ways that we can make things better, more streamlined. And as we start looking into this, we may find that AI's greatest potential may be in things that we haven't even started today.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today is I feel like you sit at such an interesting place where you have access to the CEOs and CMIOs and the leaders of all the health systems. And then also you have access to some of the smartest minds and the most connected minds of all the largest tech companies in the world. I mean, not just Microsoft. You have, I'm sure, connections to all the other big tech companies as well. Like, from your perspective, where do you see this in 5, 10 years that we're maybe not even thinking about today?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is we may be thinking about AI in a rather simplistic way, that there's a model that solves a big problem and you're done. When in fact, what we may find that the way to solve some really complicated problems is to break it up into sub-steps. Let's start with one of the hardest problems we face in medicine today, which is the diagnostic situation where a patient comes in with a whole bunch of complicated things, and we're trying to figure out like what is it that the patient has, what tests do we order, things like that. And so one approach could be, well, let's create a super amazing foundation model that has all these capabilities and see if it works. It hasn't yet to this point been able to do all the things that we think. But what we did is we actually said, well, let's break up this diagnostic problem into 5 key steps. So the first step would be, let's gather the information and let's create a differential diagnosis. So we had an agent that took a look at the information and it said, what's the possibility? What are all the possibilities? And then it passed it on to a second agent. And the second agent said, well, based on those tests or based on those diagnoses, what tests could you possibly order? So that's all it did. It just focused on what tests were possible. And then the third agent said, okay, we've got a diagnosis, we got a test. What is the guideline or the evidence-based basis for that? So all it did is look for guideline concordance on that. And then the fourth said, well, what about the cost? These some are really expensive, some are less expensive. And the last one said, well, wait a bit, have we forgot something? They called it the challenger agent. And it was really through all 5 of these agents working together that we saw something pretty impressive, which was the performance for this when you compare it to expert physicians on these different use cases was about 20%. This was 4 times greater than that. So what did that teach us? That taught us that one big super, incredible foundation model may in fact not be the answer, but it may end up being a whole series of agentic AI that is broken up into specific subtasks that are all orchestrated in a way that allows us to be able to then answer and do things that are more impressive.
David, it's so fun to talk with you about this. You're so passionate about it. You sound like you are a healthcare executive. Like you're thinking about these big picture ideas, but you work for Microsoft. So I'm so curious, like, what is it that you get to do every day from your position? Is it that you're like connecting these people with similar ideas and bringing them together to do studies? Are you funding this research? Are you, helping bring the best ideas up to the top?
I see myself as a translator, both internally within Microsoft and externally to our clients and our partners. There's amazing technologies that we have today that can do some incredible things. But oftentimes people look at them and say, well, we evaluated and it didn't quite work. It's like, well, wait a minute. Did we use the right metrics? Ambient would be a great example. People said people are going to be far more efficient. They're going to see 10 times as many patients.
Yeah.
Well, okay. First of all, what was the reason what we started with ambient? The clinicians were burned out. They're leaving the practice. This was the primary reason that we started with this. The second reason, which I think was sort of forgotten, was that the patients were saying this experience is not so good. The docs are not even paying attention, or the nurses are not paying attention to me. And what we found is that the ambient actually does a great job in terms of being able to reduce the psychological burden that we've been seeing. And so the burnout has diminished. We've seen that the administrative burden has diminished, and that the ability for people to pay attention to patients has dramatically increased. So what am I here for? I'm here to say, hey, listen, if we're going to measure these things and show its value, let's make sure that we measure it in ways that make a lot of sense. But at the same time, I'm also trying to say, hey, let's not forget about the big picture items, because this technology can solve the problems we see now, but it can also solve things that we haven't even thought of. So getting people to understand that we're on a journey together, and the technology needs sort of a translation into clinical practice, and I'm here to help with that translation.
When you think about ambient, and I'm thinking about this again as like we're really early in this. The current usage is like I pull out my phone, I hit record, and then, voila, in a minute or something like that, my note gets written. Do you have ideas with the, or you and the DAX and the Copilot and the Nuance team? Do you have ideas of like what 3-5 years in the future looks like?
Yeah, I think that there's many different paths. One is just on the fact that things have been digitized. We can do things that are going to allow us to be able to use that digital footprint of that conversation and identify many more opportunities for either clinical decision support, streamlining care, improving reimbursements, prior authorizations, things like that. So to me, that's like a path we're already seeing. Now imagine using voice in combination with some of the other things that we are capturing, like one's genetic information, and other types of omic information. So there's incredible opportunities to start combining these different data sets and getting a 360 view of what's happening with individuals, but not just also in the clinical encounter. Use voice potentially as a means where people, as they're communicating with their own personal navigator, their chatbot, to be able to help them on their journey. And so now we're starting to shift the responsibility of care being dependent on a clinical visit to now one that is empowering individuals through these technologies. So like maybe we see a shift in that direction. And then we haven't even talked about ambient vision, like
Yeah.
computer vision. And so like that's like an incredible opportunity as well. We're already seeing it for some basic stuff like, did counting sponges and the duration of the time, seeing who's coming in and out of ORs. But what we're also seeing is that we have an ability potentially to improve the surgeries and make surgeons better, to allow us to be able to democratize high quality care around the world. And these are the types of things that get me really excited because we're just scraping the surface of what's possible.
Thanks for all your continued support of How I Doctor. This has been Neogram, the AI voice clone of your regularly scheduled host, Dr. Graham Wachter. If any of this sparked something for you, we'd love to see you at the next Off-Call webinar coming in May. Head to offcall.com to sign up for the newsletter, and you'll be the first to know when registration opens.
Thanks for joining me today. For interviews with physicians creating meaningful change, check out offcall.com/podcast. You can find How I Doctor on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll have new episodes weekly. This has been and continues to be Dr. Graham Wachter. Stay well, stay inspired, and practice with purpose.